Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion, as you can tell from the title up there. Continuing my trek through the episodes of Everybody Loves Raymond, one episode and one season at a time. We're now on episode 14 of season 8, Lateness. Another episode from this season that I saw in first run. And even though I am not married, it's definitely one that I do feel a little bit more as an adult, even though when I first saw this episode, it is one that I definitely understood, and that's because it deals with getting to a place on time. And in this form, it is about Debra, for some reason, always making her and Ray late when they go out. Now, it begins on what seems like an average date night for the pair. Ray's at the bottom of the stairs, business casual, calling up to Debra, "Hey, we gotta get going, there's only so many aisle seats," because they're going for a movie date. Debra's calling down that she'll be down in a moment. And Ray says one of my favorite lines in the episode here, "Hey, by the time you're done, the movie will be out on video." Then eventually he goes to the car. Now, part of the reason that Ray wants to get there is because he needs a seat by the aisle because of his bladder. Which, after he goes out, I do love the little callback to an episode earlier in the season that Marie does, where they mention the whole P.P. Raymond debacle in passing. Perfect way to set up the whole thing, and as we find out when it cuts to a scene, probably the next day or a day or so later, where Ray's getting ready in the bathroom, and Debra comes in and do a little bit of flirting with her husband. They were in fact late. Ray couldn't get his aisle seat, and a couple times he had to go use the restroom during the movie. He had to, get in front of people, which I can get, especially if you don't like inconveniencing people in a situation where you don't have to, like a situation like that, where you don't want to have to constantly get in front of people. But that could also be Ray's just self-effacement of the situation. And Ray decides to confront Debra with this. It's like, every time we go out, you always make us late. And he brings up a couple of examples. And Debra does try to downplay it a little bit, but personally, I have to side with Ray here. And Ray does make some good points with this, is that she always makes him late. And it's always for stuff she doesn't have to do, which I understand when you're going out, you want to look your best. But it has to be dependent on the situation. Like if you're just going out on a movie date, it shouldn't take forever to get ready. Now, beginning of the episode, we don't know how long Debra was up there getting ready. But if it was hours upon hours, there's no reason for that. I don't remember if Ray says this line in this episode, but it's one he does say to her at one point, and that is, "I married you already." Which I get it. I mean, you don't want the romance to totally die in a marriage, because then it's essentially a loveless marriage or just a dead marriage or whatever term you want to throw in there. And you still want some of the romance, especially on date night. But to tie it back in what I said, you wanna, how much you doll up is going to be dependent on the situation. A normal date night, you don't need to spend that much time. I know somebody's gonna say this is from the male perspective, and like, yeah, it is. But it's also from the fact that you should not take a super amount of time to the point that you guys are going to be late, especially if your partner has a thing about being late. If they have a thing about being late, and you intentionally take overly long to get ready to the point where you're making them anxious, I'm sorry, but you're not being very good to your partner on that. I mean, if it's an accident, as we're going to see later in this episode, that's one thing. But if it's a constant thing, that's where you got to come up with communication and all that. Now, for Debra, this is the typical joke, about the wife taking forever to get ready and all that. It's a typical sitcom trope, comedy trope in general, so that's why it's there. But there's a whole thing with that. And I know someone else is going to probably point out, well, you've never been in relationships and all that. Oh, yeah, I have. And I've always been upfront that being late to a place is one of my pet peeves. One of the people I dated, they kind of did push that boundary a little bit, and that's why one of the many reasons that one didn't work out. The other one, the only time she was ever really late, it was for something out of her control, so that's why it wasn't a big issue. And that one I'm not really going to get more into other than that. But with this, Ray is bringing up some good points about it every time. And of course, this leads to them mentioning the next place they're going to go to is going to be an award that Ray and her go to every year, and Ray's like, "Ah, crap, because that one is, black tie, so, Debra's going to get very dolled up, so Ray's already dreading that. He's like, you're probably going to make us late for that too. And Debra's like, no, I'm looking forward to this as well. So Ray proposes a compromise. He brings up something that Frank used to do to them when they were younger. He called it AIS, ass in seat. Essentially was he would tell them, we're leaving tomorrow at 7 AIS. Once 7 hit, if nobody's ass was in the seat, that ass got left behind. So Debra and him agree, but on the condition that he won't be standing at the bottom of the stairs yelling up, and he's like, I won't have to. Then it cuts to the next day. Ray is technically at the bottom of the stairs, but he's not calling off. He's just getting anxious because it's getting closer to 6:30 when they were going to leave. As it gets closer, he goes outside and waits in the car. Now the kids are being watched by Robert and Amy, and of course they're down there looking at Ray like, hey, you're getting anxious and all that. Now upstairs, Debra is ready with a couple minutes to spare, and then I could probably modify that a little bit more. Bug hits her. She gets out the iron thing to go to her hair, and it gets stuck in her hair. That's why I said keep that in mind, because something like this happening would be a legitimate reason for being late. Now, of course, without knowing that she was already done, she did that last minute, that'd probably lead to a whole other argument thing, but I don't know if she'd bring that up to Ray or not. Now, as she's going downstairs, they'll let Ray know. Robert goes outside, and I love the way Brad Garrett sells this, because he's like normal when he goes outside, and then he comes in, you can tell from the look on his face, he sees what happened. Now, we, the audience, already know this has happened, because while they're doing the whole thing inside, we're cutting back and forth between them and Ray outside in the car. And he's listening to the radio, and it says what time it is, and he's looking at his watch. He's like, that is correct. And once it hits 6:30, he's like, she does not care about me. Click. That's all we need. We know what he's going to do. And the look on Robert's face when he comes in tells us that he did it. Ray went to the awards without Debra. And the way that Debra and Amy both react sells it pretty well. And of course, Amy and Robert are like, oh, we'll take you over there. But then Debra said, I'm not going now because Ray will pay, as she puts it. Now, to be fair, and this is something that Ray brings up later, they had an agreement. And while she technically was late for a valid reason because of the whole hair thing, she technically broke the agreement. So him leaving is within the bounds of their agreement. Even if it is something only a dead person would do, as we're going to find out. That's the humor of this, but him leaving to get there on his own, perfectly reasonable. Now, for a date night thing, it is something that would kill a date night. Now, especially if this was early in a relationship thing, I could see something like this killing a relationship. And a marriage thing in real life would probably lead to a bigger fallout depending on the dynamics of the partners involved. But here we know what these two are about, so we know it's not going to lead to anything permanent. Partially, excuse me. Doo-doo. Say it once again with me. So come writing. But Ray's going to pay, because Debra's not going to go there. She'll just wait for her husband to come home, and then she'll start to yell. Well, Ray gets to the awards. He seems like he's having a fun time. He's going to have fun. He runs into Andy and Bernie, and they're like, hey, where's Debra? And Ray tells them, she'll get her when she's getting ready. She wasn't done. We had an agreement. She is an adult. She has access to a vehicle, which is true. Debra could have still gone there. She could have been dropped off, but she decided not to go. And Andy and Bernie, of course, bring up why this is probably a bad idea. And I love the way that Andy brings it up. He's like, I don't know anything about women, but isn't this going to make Debra angry? And of course, he has a callback line later. He's like, I guess I do know something about women. It's that and Bernie describing what would happen if he did that to his wife. Her just stewing, all dressed up, waiting for me to come back, but I don't. And it's as he's describing it, more and more realization dawns on Randy. He's like, oh, crap. I'm a dead man. And he gets flowers and goes home. Now, of course, before he gets home, when we cut back, we see that was also date night for Frank and Marie. They went to the opera. Because, it's Placido Domingo, Marie's favorite opera singer. And we got all dressed up, and they did go out to go see it. Frank went with her. And of course, he fell asleep during it because he doesn't really like opera, but the fact is he still made the effort and went out with her so she could at least enjoy her night. Now Ray gets in and he's got the flowers. And of course, Frank and Marie find out what happened. And we find out that the ass and seat thing was only ever done to the kids. Frank never did it to Marie. Because as in his own words, that's just suicide. And as Marie puts it, he's still here, isn't he? Which of course, you see why. And then of course, Debra comes down. And you know, it's a whole big conversation talking about going out and being late and all that. And we find out Marie also takes forever, but you know, it's a typical sitcom trope there. Once the two are alone, Ray gets his little speech that he gets to deliver to Debra, and I love the way that Ray Romano plays this, where you can definitely tell he's a character that he is apologizing, but he is standing on the principle of the whole situation, trying to explain himself. And just the way that this is written, and I didn't mention it at the top, but this is another episode written by Steve Skrovan. And if you've watched enough of the episodes he's written throughout this point of the show, you can see his fingerprints all over this, especially in the type of situation we're in and in the dialogue he gives Ray here, where he's like apologizing and mentioning everything, and then when he brings up his point, it's like, you say you don't mean to be late, but you always are. And then he apologizes and mentions, like, even though you're the one that broke the agreement, I got you this flower. Now, Debra does not have any actual retort when it comes to auditory, but she does have the final point here where she tells Ray, we'll discuss this upstairs. Ray goes upstairs, and of course, you know, in a minute. And she starts watching TV downstairs, falls asleep in front of the TV, and Ray is sitting in the bedroom, sitting on the bed, flower in hand, waiting. Now, it's done for comedic effect, and it does end this episode on an excellent note, and this is the best way they could have ended this episode. But of course, we all know someone with brains after maybe 15-20 minutes would have probably peeked downstairs to see what their spouse was doing. And been like, oh, she's just watching TV. Well, I guess at the end, put the flowers, changed out, and then either waited for them to come up or just go to bed if they didn't. But perfect way to end this. And as you can tell from how I'm gushing about this episode, it is still a favorite episode. Now, most of what I'm talking about with lateness and relationship part, that is the part that I feel more as an adult than I did as a kid. As a kid, when this episode came out, it would have been more the lateness thing, and it's a little disrespectful if you know your partner is anxious about it, and or even just a friend or whatnot you're going out with has the thing about being late, and then you're always late to a place. I mean, I always have that anxious thing about it, so I always try to leave at an early time, even though sometimes procrastination does creep in, but when that happens, it's your own fault. There's not really any trivia to mention on this one. Of course, we got Tom and Andy playing their characters here, and no one else outside of the main cast in this one. There's not much else to talk about other than what I've already talked about, but definitely one that you should show people from this season, and it's definitely going to make the VHS list. Now, the next one coming up is an episode that I remember at least the synopsis of it when it came out, but I do not know why I didn't watch this one. Maybe I was busy that week or whatnot, or maybe I just like, yeah, maybe I'll catch it, and I just didn't. But it's definitely one I remember enjoying a little bit when I first got the DVD, but it's definitely not one that I would always watch. It was definitely a marathon one, but we'll see how that changes when I get to it, and that's going to be, of course, the party dress episode. Till next time, everybody.